savaged Bobby at a congressional hearing that was about censorship. How ironic. She tried to censor him. We're going to let him speak. Whether I don't agree with Bobby on the vaccines. I'm quintuple vaxxed. I don't agree with Bobby on Ukraine. I am. And by the way, if I pop off in the middle of the speech, then you guys will know I shouldn't have had them. And if I make it to the end, who knows? But we don't have to agree, because that's the whole point. We don't have to hate each other for no reason. The Talmud says that's the reason that God destroyed the temple. People who hated each other for no reason, and America is going there, and we're going to stop it. We're going to have a civil dialogue tonight, but I want to finish that Debbie Wasserman Schultz savaged Bobby Kennedy, said he's an anti-Semite, and she did not reveal that she voted for the Iran deal in 2015 to give these people who want to murder my nation, her people, $150 billion. You know what? You want to know how much money that is? For those of you who say Israel gets $3 billion a year, most America gives in any one foreign aid, it would take Israel half a century to get what that deal gave Iran in unfrozen assets. She also voted to keep Ilhan Omar on the House Foreign Relations, which leads me to this final point. My friends, is it possible that the outrage we heard against Bobby Kennedy had some kind of other agenda? Is it possible that there was an agenda that here is someone who is speaking out in favor of Israel as a Democratic aspirant to the presidency with more passion than anyone since John F. Kennedy and Robert Francis Kennedy? The Democratic Party was always traditionally the most pro-Israel party. Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel within 11 minutes after it was founded. Then we went through 8 years of the Eisenhower administration, which was basically hostile to Israel, including forcing Israel out of the Sinai in 1956. It was John F. Kennedy who changed that. It was Robert Kennedy who raised it to excellence. Lyndon Johnson was also a very pro-Israel president. Now we see Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. And by the way, I'm not criticizing the Democratic Party. There are Republicans who, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who say the most disgusting things about Jews, and they should be called up by the Republican Party. We see Republican candidates who blow dog whistles to white supremacists. Utterly unacceptable. Antisemitism fighting it has to be a bipartisan issue. I've gone on way too long in this introduction, only because I want to make one point. Bobby, you and I agree on many things, and we disagree on many things. But the slander that you are an anti-Semite is something that I take personal offense to, which is why I stood up against it, because it is a disgusting, dirty lie. And I thank you for your friendship to my people. We need that friendship. We are a beleaguered nation right now, not understanding why this oldest of ancient hatreds has risen its heads with such ferocity, and we need outspoken, courageous voices like you to fight it. And thank you for being here tonight. Gabe? Thank you. The pictures. Okay. Bobby, what was the last week and a half like for you?
Well, it had its ups and downs. Listen, I have a thick skin. I've been involved in controversial issues for most of my career, and usually stuff, even vitriol and poison, does not affect me very much. Or it really doesn't affect me at all. My wife actually complains about that. But the charge of anti-Semitism is one that cuts me. And it hurts me, it hurts Cheryl, it hurts our family. And so that was painful. But I also, when I was sitting in front of the committee and seeing the people who were making that charge against me, my attitude toward them was not hatred or anger. I was I don't know why they made those charges. I don't believe they believe that I'm an anti-Semite. I've literally never said an anti-Semitic word in my life. But I believe that they probably think what they were doing was right in one way or another. And I think we all have this capacity for self-delusion, to judge ourselves on our intentions rather than our actions. And I think if we're going to really heal the divide between Americans, which is one of the things that I'm trying to do with this campaign, is we can't react even to hatred with hatred. We have to react with forgiveness. We have to react with kindness and generosity. If you harbor resentments, it's like swallowing poison and hoping someone else will die. It corrodes our own souls. So I think for me, my reaction was appropriate, I think, which is to say that that's not true, and to try to have my say, but to not react, as you pointed out, with vitriol in return.
Well, but help me understand. Help. Thank you, thank you. When you run for president, we're going to have you up here. But right now he is, so let him speak. Thank you very much. No. He is running for president. We will have questions at the end. We will. We're going to have questions at the end, and if you're quiet now, I'll choose you first, okay? If you're silent now, I'll give you the first question. If you're not, I asked, why is this night so different than all other nights? It turns out I had no idea. Okay. Okay.
Can you just take this? Can someone grab this from your team?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Bobby, help me.
I apologize for interrupting.
Thank you for your apology, but thank you. Okay. Bobby, help me understand, please help me understand why. Why does the charge of anti-Semitism cut so deep? You've been called so many things since you launched your candidacy, even before that. COVID-19 is a very charged issue. The vaccines are a charged issue. The mandates are a charged issue. You were called all kinds of names. But you're saying that this charge of anti-Semitism cuts even deeper. Why?
I've spent a lifetime studying the Holocaust. I understand that the unprecedented injury, murder of 6 million Jews during World War II, and then the years and years of the centuries of pogroms that preceded those in Germany, in Spain, in Poland and Romania, and across the land. And I also have many friends who are, I have friends who are Holocaust survivors. I have friends who are children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And I understand the pain of anti-Semitism to those people. And I do not want to contribute to that pain. And I don't want people who have suffered in that way and whose lives have been touched by suffering to suspect that I, in some way, approve or endorse their suffering. And that's why it hurts me.
You have a lot of Jewish friends. How did they react to the past few days? Larry David's a good friend. He's your shadchan. He's your matchmaker to Cheryl Hines, her wife. By the way, you were supposed to give him money. Did you give him, like, in the Jewish community, if someone introduces you to your wife, you have to give him a matchmaking fee?
I did not yet. I've neglected that duty, but I will.
Well, I hope he's watching. He should come and claim it with interest.
Well, Larry wrote me a note saying, you're the last person in the world that should ever be called an anti-Semite, but if you ever use the word Jew, you're dead. So that was his reaction. But there's nobody who knows me who believes I'm an anti-Semite. So I got a lot of support from my friends. And, I got support from all over the world, from people who've known me all my life and within the Jewish community. You know, I'm very, very happy with the support I got. And I don't feel, like I said, I don't feel personally damaged by it. I just feel like I do not want to be the person who adds pain but to the lives of other people who have suffered or are associated with that kind of suffering.
Bobby, I just want to deal with this quickly, because I really want to focus more on combating anti-Semitism in Israel and some other issues. But let's just deal with the comments for a moment. So do you understand why, I'm not speaking about those with an agenda, but those without an agenda may have reacted very strongly to the suggestion that, that the Jewish community was more immune to the COVID-19 virus in light of false accusations against the Jewish people, particularly when it came to the Black Death, the bubonic plague?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't have made those. You know, as you know, I was describing an article that I had nothing to do with. It was an NIH-funded article that was published in 2021 in one of the 10 top high gravitas journals, and it was done by the Cleveland Clinic, scientists and others. That looked at something that was not surprising, which many diseases disproportionately impact some races and disproportionately spare others. And it went through the list of races that were impacted. It's not something that I would have talked about at a public event, because I'm aware of the history of blood libels and how, though that kind of information is used by malicious people to drum up hatred of Jews. I talked about it at an event that I was told was Chatham House rules. It was in the context of a larger context of the development of ethnic bioweapons, which our nations are now investing in, which every race, particularly vulnerable races, should be frightened of. And I was giving an illustration about how even this disease appears to affect some race disproportionately, which of course those kind of traits can be expanded in order to create ethnic bioweapons, which would really be a bane on humanity. I was talking about it in that context. And in fact, I said, you know, there's no evidence that it was engineered. And of course, it would not have been engineered by Jews in any case. It clearly, the people who were involved in gain of function were, we know who they were, and they weren't Jewish. And, you know, it was most intensely, the most intense of those experiments were in China and Wuhan.
What do you feel that you've learned over the past week?
I think I've learned the lesson that Larry suggested to me, that, listen, I'm running for president, and I have a large infrastructure invested interests who want to damage my candidacy and want to silence me with the government to censor me. I was the first one censored by the Biden administration, and Judge Doty's decision details that chronology that President Biden took the oath of office on January 21st, 2021, and the White House gave its first order to Twitter to censor me 37 hours later. Now, it was not just a Democratic Party enterprise. I was censored also by the Trump administration. But by you, when I was talking about Paul Revere. But there's another way of censoring people, which is some institutions made them and take the people. I'm going to make this point that I, as a candidate who's aware of these things, I should have been more careful about what I said, because I know that anything that I say is going going to be used, it's going to be distorted, and it's going to be weaponized against me.
But conversely, the presidential platform provides a microphone to the world like no other. You can stand up for things you believe in like in no other race, in no other campaign, which is why we're here tonight. Not just to talk about defensive issues, but I have one more to go to, but also the positive. But one more thing here, because I want to make sure that we just deal with this so that we can move past it. The other thing that was raised by your critics was your having met with Louis Farrakhan. And President Obama met with Louis Farrakhan, but he wasn't called an anti-Semite. You and I talked a little about Nation of Islam. I told you that Malcolm X's daughter had been to our home for Shabbat many times. Malcolm X had a fascinating growth period as a human being, ending his life assassinated February 1965, but as a great man who was really beginning to see the huge vistas of the human condition. But he himself turned against the Nation of Islam because he felt that it had an anti-Jewish, an anti-white message. That doesn't mean the Nation of Islam is entirely negative. That the dignity they try to give African-American men and women in general, men in particular, is extremely positive. It's the anti-Semitic element, particularly by Louis Farrakhan, which is so deeply offensive. He calls Jews. What do you feel toward him now, and particularly in light of how anti-Semitism is now growing so virulently?
Well, let me give you the context for that. I wrote a book, and I think it was in 2015. It was very dangerous, 1,000 times. It was in the brains of who took those and called fear of in all numbers that had been removed were being sent communities, to poor communities. They weren't being sent to the suburbs. They weren't being sent to wealthy communities. And I wrote an article about that, saying that black kids were disproportionately being given this neurotoxin. And black kids already, as you know, and if you're concerned with, are already suffering from other neurotoxins like lead. 44% of urban black kids have dangerous levels of lead. They had a neurotoxin. Another neurotoxin to that is not a good idea. I had written an article about that, and I was contacted because of that article by leaders of the Nation of Islam. And they asked me if I'd be willing to come to Chicago to their headquarters to talk to their doctors and their medical staff and their leadership about this issue. And I said, yes, I would. And and Minister Farrakhan was at that meeting. So I think that if I were asked, and as a result of that, they adopted policies to inform people about this danger. So if I was asked, and this is almost a Talmudic discussion at this point, do you meet with a person who has absolutely been reprehensible on an issue like that if you can save one child? And, that is the calculation that I had to make, that maybe I was saving a lot of children. And so I made a decision. It was a difficult decision. I wanted to say this because you know this about me, Rabbi, that I don't cancel people, even like reprehensible people. I met with Sirhan, who was involved in one way or another in my father's death. I went to prison and met him. I've been to Havana and met with Fidel Castro. I've met with, with many people with whom I disagree on many issues. And I think at some point, even people, first of all, I think everybody ultimately is redeemable, and that we need to talk to each other. If we're going to heal divisions between us, you can't do that by marginalizing your enemy. You do that by, ultimately by talking to them. And one of Martin Luther King's closest friends was a man who was a minister to the Ku Klux Klan, and a man that he admired greatly. And so I think that there's something, it's a difficult moral decision, because are you validating somebody by appearing with them? And are you, even though you don't adopt their hatred, but, is it worth meeting with somebody anyway and letting them know that your values are very different, but that we need to be talking to each other?
Listen, that's a fair point. And if we had the time, we would veer from a discussion just about anti-Semitism in Israel and talk about that. We don't have the time, but I would like to just suggest that there's two possible moral approaches. The first is, if you're going to meet with someone like Farrakhan, who calls Jews termites, but you're doing so to save black children, and your father created a unique alliance between blacks and Jews in his 1968 presidential campaign, but if you're going to meet with him, then the first thing you need to say to him publicly is, Minister Farrakhan, I find your views on Jews reprehensible. It's beneath you. You're looked up to by millions of people. This is an abrogation of your responsibility as a leader to ever look at a human being that way and to speak that way about another human being. And I think it's about speaking truth to power.
And I did have a conversation like that. I did not make it public, but I had that conversation.
But it's a fair moral dilemma. But there are people that we do end up legitimizing that we have to be careful with. But be that as it may, let's now move to Israel. Bobby, I lived in England during the, let's call it, I was a rabbi at Oxford University, during, let's call it the Corbynization of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. So Israel was supported by the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and little by little the whole Labour Party was lost, and that's the way it remains in the UK till today. The Conservative Party, Rishi Sunak, is seen as very pro-Israel, Margaret Thatcher, John Major, but the Labour Party has kind of been lost. And the Jewish community made peace with that. There's many in the Jewish community here in the United States who are kind of looking at the Republican Party and saying the same thing. Trump was the most pro-Israel president. He moved the embassy. He recognized the Golan Heights. Obama gave us the Iran deal, and they're kind of writing off the Democratic Party. I don't believe in that in the slightest. And I was suggesting before that your incredibly strong pro-Israel posture may be why, you're challenging an entire party right now to almost go back to the roots. So let's talk about that for a moment. What is your connection to Israel? What do you think about Israel? And what do you think about the Democratic Party's posture vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, I was, my father was in the service in World War II. My uncle was killed in World War II. My Uncle Joe, my Uncle John Kennedy was the only president who's ever been awarded the Purple Heart. His boat was his PT boat was cut in two, and he was presumed dead for 10 days before he was found on an island in the Solomon Island chain, he and his crew who he had rescued. My uncle, Billy Hartington, was killed during the war. And I was born in 1954, and the war was still, a major preoccupation in our house, and the question of what had happened to the Germans in World War II, and how a race of people that was the most educated, civilized, and humane race had descended into that kind of barbarism. And there was, it was a subject of constant debate and attention in our home, and it was the Holocaust was regarded as the nadir of modern human existence, and so I grew up with those assumptions and grew up believing that the state of Israel was this extraordinary blossom in the desert. It was an oasis of democracy, of of values of human rights in a midst of sea of totalitarianism. And I made that assumption. I mean, I assumed that my children would feel the same way. I was shocked in recent years that my kids coming home from college had a very different narrative about Israel that they had picked up from their, from the Gestalt, from the milieu. And that narrative is the narrative that has been adopted in recent years by the Democratic Party, which sees Israel as an occupying nation, an imperium, oppressing indigenous Palestinians, and as you know, as a racist state and an apartheid state. And part of my campaign is going to be a major piece of it is going to be explaining to American citizens why that view is wrong, and making the moral case for Israel. Israel, as you know, is the only place in the Mideast where there's freedom of expression for all citizens. 1.9 million Palestinians in Israel, and they vote. Palestinians serve in the legislature. They serve in the courts. They serve, I believe there's 3 Palestinians on the 12-person Supreme Court. There's no place in the Mideast where there is a Jew on any court or any legislature. Maybe in Morocco, there may be some public officials who are Jewish, but nowhere in the Mideast. It's the only place where women have rights. As you know, this week, people in Iran are being jailed. Women are being jailed for wearing habibs, or not wearing habibs. It's the only place where gays have rights. There was 2 weeks ago a gay pride parade in Israel with 150,000 people in both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. At the same time, the government of Iran is hanging gays from cherry pickers and castrating them. And that is true throughout the Mideast. It's the only place where there's freedom of religion, where you are free to practice any religion that you want in Israel. It's the only place where you can have freedom of expression. A Palestinian who wants to criticize his government had better do it in Israel. It's the only place where he can do it. If he does that in the West Bank, he will be tortured and killed and arrested, or in Gaza. And the Israeli Supreme Court, and I've been a critic of the current reforms or the modifications of the Supreme Court in Israel. I can criticize Israel without being an anti-Semite. I want to talk about that in a minute. But Israel's Supreme Court judiciary is the most humane judiciary in the world. As somebody who's a litigator and a constitutional scholar, and who taught law for 35 years, there is no country in the world with a court like a judiciary like Israel. This is the only country that have actually dealt with the ticking time bomb issue. So the ticking time bomb issue scenario is if there is a terrorist who knows the location of a bomb that is about to kill civilians in huge numbers, can you torture that person to find out where the bomb is located? In Israel, the law is clear. You cannot. You cannot. And that is evidence of the humanity that you see in all of Israel's policies, military policies, the hold that the court has over Israel. I'm very proud of the Israeli Supreme Court. I don't want to see it dismantled. I think it is a source of pride to the world about what an independent judiciary can do. They won't allow people to, it won't allow the military to capture people's relatives in order to pressure somebody to talk. The conduct of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, when they go into Palestinian territories is beyond anything in the world. Colonel Camp, one of the leading military historians and tacticians around the world, said, last week, 2 weeks ago, when Israel went to Jenin. Jenin is a bomb factory. Most nations, Russia, when it was dealing with issues like Jenin and Chechnya, simply bombed the neighborhood, because you have a neighborhood where virtually 100% of the people who live there are supporting terrorism, where the terrorists are hiding behind civilians, and where everybody is involved in bomb making. And those bombs are destined to kill civilians, to be strapped on men, women, and children, and kill civilians in Israel. Most nations, and we've done this ourselves, and clearly Russia was doing it in Chechnya. Chechnya would go in there and bomb that neighborhood. What the Israeli IDF does is they send people to do retail combat, door to door, putting IDF soldiers at risk in order to avoid civilian casualties, collateral casualties. In the recent Jenin attack, there was 12 terrorists who were killed, all of them involved in bomb making, all of them involved in planning attacks on Jewish civilians, and not a single innocent person, child or civilian. Israel is unique in the Mideast for saying we're only going to attack military targets, and they're very, very disciplined about doing so. Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, in contrast, follows a long tradition of deliberately targeting civilians. So anybody, and not only that, but they have a pay-to-slay policy. That is the official policy of the Palestinian Authority. If you kill a Jew, not a member of the IDF, if you kill any Jew, you are going to get awarded with pay for life. And if you go to jail or you're killed, your family will get payments for life. And the official policy of Hamas is the genocide of all the Jews. So they consider, and this, by the way, in 1948, when Israel was attacked at its birth, the plans were captured of Syria and Egypt and the other nations, and their plan was complete extermination of the Jews. They took the side of Hitler during World War II. They lost the war, and the practice and the policy of all those nations is to kill individual civilians, whereas Israel does the opposite. It only attacks military targets. Now, in any attack, civilians do die, and that's always a tragedy and always an atrocity, but it's not deliberate. And they're unique in that sense, and I just want to go through a little bit of the history of Israel, because Israel, for many of you who don't know the history, first of all, the Jews have been there for 3,700 years. The term Palestine was actually invented by the Romans when they were trying to exterminate the Jews and move them out. They named Judea after the Jews' enemies, the Philistines. But it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Palestinians during World War I fought against the Allied forces, so they were on the losing side. And at the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled, and the League of Nations and Woodrow Wilson said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take apart the Ottoman Empire, and we're going to give the ownership of those countries to the indigenous people who lived in the country. Well, Palestine was a large area. It's called the British Mandate. And more than half the people who lived there were Jews. I think it was about 600,000. I think there were about 500,000 Palestinians. I could be wrong about those numbers, and they're probably disputed. Despite that fact, so there were two groups that were due to get land. And 4/5 of the land, because of bigotry against the Jews, 4/5 of that land was given to the Palestinians. It's now called Jordan. And 1/5, a tiny little sliver of traditional land, was given to the Jews. And And then there was a series of wars. In 48, Israel became a state. All the nations around it attacked it, and some of them took chunks away. The Gaza Strip was taken. The Judea and Samaria, the West Banks, were taken by Jordan. And the Temple Mount was also taken by Jordan. And Israel lived without those for many years. And then those countries all attacked Israel again with an unprovoked attack in 1967. I remember sitting with my father on the patio beside our swimming pool when he got a call from the White House. And somebody on that phone told him that Syria and Egypt had just attacked Israel, and Jordan would soon join it. Israel said to Jordan, "Please don't attack us, and we won't touch your land, we won't attack you." Jordan attacked anyway. And as a result of that, I remember I said to my father, "How can Israel survive?" Because the land owned by the Arabs is 600 times the land owned by Israel. It's a tiny, tiny little sliver, 20 miles across. I said, "How can they survive with all these giant nations attacking them?" And he said to me, "The Israelis are tough," which was the highest accolade that he could give anybody. So I understood his admiration for them. The Israelis won that war by a miracle. And they took back the Temple Mount, which was theirs. It was their part of the mandate. They took the West Bank, and they took the Gaza Strip, and they gave the Golan Heights. And then the UN resolution and the Israel government said, "We will give those lands all back to the countries from which they took, even though we won them fairly in a war, even though they are part of our historical lands. We will trade land for peace. If you promise that you won't attack us anymore, we will give you back that land." And Egypt agreed and got the Golan Heights back. And Syria. The Sinai and Syria agreed and got the Golan Heights. But Jordan wouldn't agree. So,
Egypt got Sinai and
right. And again and again, the Israelis have negotiated with the Palestinians at Camp David, and again and again, the Israelis have offered to make giant concessions and give back all the land if there would be peace. And every time the Palestinians refused, Prince Bandar, who was at Camp David and who was from Saudi Arabia, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, who was the referee at Camp David, said it was 100% the fault of Yasser Arafat. They would not take the most generous concessions. And that brings us to where we are today, which is that young Palestinians are being taught to murder Jews in the schools. And some 80% of the Palestinian people, when they're polled in poll after poll, says that it is okay to murder Jews, individual Jews, that Israel has no right to exist, and that ultimately it must be destroyed. Oh, Israel, listen, when our country was during World War II, we have a big country. It's very, very hard to invade us. And during World War II, every country, when it's under national security threat, it imposes restrictions on citizens. You become something of a national security state. We put Japanese in concentration camps who did nothing in World War II. Israel has not done that. Israel takes precautions, but every Palestinian, the 1.9 million Palestinians who live in Israel vote and they participate. They're not called to the army. They're not required to serve like other people are. I'll say one other thing. During the Oslo Accords, one of the agreements during the Oslo Accords was that Palestinians had a right to return, who lived in Israel, had a right to return to Palestine. And they assumed that hundreds of thousands of them would do so, and they would be given land in Palestine. And they would live under the Palestinian Authority. There's a lot of empty land in Palestine, and they were given the right to go there. It was assumed hundreds of thousands of them would take advantage of that offer, but only 4,000 went. And why is that? Why did they prefer to live in Israel? Because of the freedom of Israel. Because if you go to Palestine, Palestine is a kleptocracy. Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. His wife is a billionaire. The people who run Hamas have $700 million. And we give $800 million a year to the Palestinian Authority. They use some of that money to pay people to kill Jews, civilians. So, and these are issues you may dispute with me, but you need to think about them. And these are the issues that I talk to my kids about and that I want to talk to the Democratic Party about, because the current narrative about Israel is not an accurate narrative. It's a narrative that is, that ultimate, and listen, if you want it, everybody can criticize Israel. That's not anti-Semitic, but if you criticize Israel and you are applying a different standard to Israel than to the countries around it, if you take the United Nations, passed last year something like, 50 or 60 resolutions against Israel, more than all of the other countries in the world combined. And yet, there are many, many countries that have really reprehensible human rights records, and they never get reprimanded by the UN. Oh, if you're holding Israel alone to this standard, and you don't hold nations to that standard that are much, much worse than Israel, and you have to wonder whether that is not anti-Semitism.
Okay, I'm going home because I'm retired. Oh my gosh. Bobby Kennedy, if you're an anti-Semite, then I am funnier than Larry David. If you're an anti-Semite, then I am People Magazine's sexiest man alive. If you're an anti-Semite, then I really should just eat my yarmulke right now before the fast tomorrow. I'm very involved in trying to protect Israel. I have a son who's in the Israeli army right now. I have another son who served in the Israeli army. I have a daughter who served in the Israeli army. I don't think I have ever heard a major American political figure express so kaleidoscopically support for Israel in the historical context as what we just heard. That was unprecedented. I want you all to know that was really unexpected, and it causes me to issue a challenge. I really hope that Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz gets a recording of that, a clip of it, because I want to challenge her to either match it, repeat it, endorse it, or to publicly apologize. I'm asking her to apologize from the United States House of Representatives. And I'm asking the same of my congressman, Josh Gottheimer. Josh, you and I have known each other for 3 decades. You'll see this clip. You should either repeat, endorse, or place on your own social media everything that Bobby just said. And if you do, we can all call this even. But if you don't, you owe Bobby Kennedy an apology for calling him anti-Semitic and saying he's an embarrassment to the Kennedy name when, as he just said, he has an uncle who volunteered for what was almost a suicide mission in the Second World War. Joe Kennedy Jr. gave his life for the United States. Your family became a Gold Star family. Your father, we've spoken of the incredible affinity he felt with our people. Yeah, To be honest, I don't even have words. That a man who just said that could be called an anti-Semite. Honestly, I just don't have words. Bobby, the Kennedy family is a little bit like the Jewish people. Triumphant and tragic at the same time. Sadly, there's a lot of symmetry. You're the most famous political family in the United States, maybe the world, but you've suffered unspeakable tragedy. How do you survive something like that? Do you see your family as triumphant or tragic or both?
Well, you know, my mom told us when we were little that, I mean, we were discouraged from complaining and about, you know, whatever happened. And my mom would say to us, you know, everybody takes their licks. There's kids in Harlem and the South Bronx who lose both their parents to violence, to bullets, and they don't have the family that you do. They don't have the resources, the education, the access, the values that we were given and drilled into us from when we were little, that gave us tremendous resilience. And you know, my mom said something when one of my brothers died, and I said to her, I said, does the hole that they leave when they die, does it ever get any smaller? And she said, and she has experienced a lot of death by then in her life, including both her parents killed in plane crashes, her brother killed in a plane crash, and many, many other tragedies. And she said the hole never gets any smaller, but our job is to make ourselves bigger around the hole. And the way that we do that is we take the best virtues of the people who have died, and we try to integrate those virtues into our own character. And in doing that, we provide that person with a kind of immortality, because they're now living through us, the best parts of them. But we also make ourselves into a larger human being, and that way the whole gets proportionally smaller. And, you know, I think of that a lot of times. You know, I lost two of my nieces during the pandemic. And, you know, as you know, I lost my wife who took her own life. And two of my brothers, my cousin John, who is my closest friend, and his wife. And in coping with those tragic circumstances in my life, I've been able to utilize that piece of wisdom that my mother gave me, and you know, and take those tragedies and try to help other people through, try to lighten the burden of the other people who are enduring them. You know, to know what to say, to console them, and to try to, you know, make something good in my own character come out of each of these tragedies.
You said earlier that you're not going to strike back at your critics, that you're running a different kind of campaign, that you're not going to engage in the gutter. And I've seen you almost, is it Jesus-like, to turn the other cheek? I've seen you hit and struck this whole week. I've seen family members come against you. And by the way, I'm sure Bobby would not say this, but to the extent, I don't know Jack Schlossberg, Bobby's second cousin, but to the extent that he felt the need to kind of go low, it's one thing, we can all respectfully disagree with things politically, but when you start using the word embarrassment and when you try to play a game of one-upmanship of who's more of a Kennedy in a family, that doesn't appeal to me personally, especially when you don't reveal that, okay, you support President Biden. President Biden is a good man, but he did make your mother the ambassador to Australia, and she deserves it. Caroline Kennedy is an incredible woman, but it does create a conflict of interest. You have an obligation to tell that to the public and put your criticism in context. So I'll say those kinds of things because I'm not a member of your family, and I try to heal families. I don't like to see this kind of conflict. You never, he's a counterpuncher. He always says that, he counterpunches. If you say Trump's hair is orange, he will, you know, decapitate you on Twitter. If you say that he has a hair out of place, and people are scared of him. But you're saying you're taking a totally different approach. That's very, and then people say you're the Trump of the Democratic Party. It's kind of the opposite. You've decided not to strike back. Can someone like you survive a presidential contest?
Well, I mean, I'm not scared of a fight. My whole life has been, I've chosen a life with litigation, which is a daily fist fight. Oh, I do not shy away from a fight. It's just what I try to do is not become personal in the fight. Not to make it not to go after somebody personally, but I will, I think President Biden is wrong on a lot of issues. And so I spend my time talking about those issues rather than his personal problems. And for me, that's just a better way to live. But I get up every day ready to go to war. It's just the rules of war for me are to keep my own peace.
To focus on the issues and not on personalities?
Exactly.
I'm going to ask you two more questions, then we're going to go to questions from the audience. Would you sign an Iran deal?
Well, I can't say that I would not sign an Iran deal. If Iran needs to do two things in order to be integrated into the community of nations. One, it needs to give up plans to build a nuclear bomb. And and I said,
do you think they need any kind of nuclear program?
No, they don't. I mean, Iran is an energy superpower. It has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. It's completely energy independent. It's an energy exporter. There's no reason that it needs a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant is not economic. It's not good for the environment. It is, and the only reason they want it is to build a bomb. And I said this. I'm anti-war, but I said this in 2002 when we were going to war with Iran. I said this war, or Iraq. I said this war is going to expose us as a paper tiger. It is a war that we shouldn't be going in. It's a preemptive war against somebody who never did anything to us. Saddam Hussein doesn't harbor terrorists. He had nothing to do with the World Trade Center attack. He doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. And we're going to expose ourselves and we're going to weaken our country the same way that we've weakened our country now with Ukraine. We're going to weaken America, and we should save our strength for something that's important. And that most important thing, military objective for us, should be to prevent the launch of a nuclear arms race in the Mideast, which will be the end of humanity. Our policy should be that nobody now in the Mideast should have nuclear weapons because of the danger to all of us. And the U.S. should use its moral authority, its economic clout, and even if it's military as necessary, to prevent the development of nuclear weapons by any Mideastern nation. I've said that for over 20 years, and I think that that's really, really important. So Iran should get, there should be no deal with Iran unless Iran pledges verifiably not to have a nuclear weapons program. Number two, to change its policy of funding Hamas to kill Israelis and to fund the genocide of Jews. And those two things.
Would you insist that they stop all genocidal rhetoric against Israel?
Well, I don't know how you can patrol that, but I would say there, any official document that's what they should be doing, and I would, of course, urge them to do that with whatever terms that I had leverage on. But yeah, I think that's what needs to happen if we want to bring them into the community of nations. And by the way, the money, the $152 billion that we're shipping over there, that we're trying to give, that the Biden administration is trying to give them, that money was money that was impounded by the U.S. from Iranians whose assets we froze. The money does not belong to the Iranian government. It belongs to individual Iranians, and we should not be sending it to the Israeli government because it's fungible. And of course, it's going to end up building their nuclear weapons program.
And funding terrorism.
Yeah.
Okay, my final question. Bobby, your father in 1968 famously put together a coalition that was so unpredictable. It was essentially Latino agriculture workers, Cesar Chavez, the African-American community who loved him, Native Americans, which they weren't the biggest part of the American electorate. He highlighted them. In our first conversation, I told you that, I've consumed so many books about your father, the things he said about Native Americans, the places that he went, let alone Appalachia, and then finally the Jewish community. And that would seem to be the odd person out, because I have a very close relationship with the black community. And I've defended people like the Reverend Al Sharpton, who's a very good friend, also against false charges of anti-Semitism. He always says to me, Shmuley, you and I disagree without being disagreeable. For all those people who say that Al Sharpton's an anti-Semite, when Kanye West praised Hitler and called Jews money grubbing recently, Al Sharpton came to our Hanukkah event at Carnegie Hall, lit a menorah, and condemned his remarks. And Shimon Peres, Israel's foreign minister at the time, of course also prime minister and president, we hosted Al Sharpton together right after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. But many people in the black community, they don't see a natural affinity with the Jewish community, because they say to me all the time, Shmuley, I feel that the Jewish community has kind of forgotten its roots. You guys have become prosperous. That's obviously not true. Not all Jews are prosperous. We're like every community. Some are not. But your father seems to have seen what others did not see, that in those four constituencies, Latino agriculture workers, Native Americans, the black community, the Jewish community was not a privileged community. It was like a persecuted community. He was trying to give them voice. That Israel was a vulnerable democracy. Like you said, Israel's 1967 military victory was not foretold, it was miraculous. How much of your own affinity with the Jewish community, first of all, if you could even address that, I'd appreciate it, but how much of your own affinity with the Jewish community comes from your father? You revere your father's memory. The way you write about your father in the book American Values is just beautiful. The picture you have on the front cover of being on his back is just beautiful. You look exactly like him. I'm not the first person to say that. You bear his name. How much of this campaign is about him? But because you're sprinkled with the stardust of his magic, and your campaign is beginning to electrify America with the stardust of that RFK magic. When he was cut short, at least with your uncle, we were able to see where it led. It led to the presidency. Yes, he didn't finish his first term, and it was tragic, but it was also triumphant. But your father, we didn't even get, we don't know what would have happened. And here you are you completing that circle? And how much of your connection with Israel and the eloquence you've expressed today, the unparalleled eloquence of putting Israel in the historical context, the Jews are the indigenous people of the ancient biblical lands, opposition to Iran, etc., all these things, how much comes from your father and how much of the campaign comes from your father?
Well, as you know, you've read my book, that I've spent a lot of time studying both my father and my uncles and my whole family history. I feel very comfortable with the values that they spent their lives and that they ultimately died for. The love that, they had for this country. My grandfather once said, somebody said, you're Irish, and he said, Ireland never did anything for the Kennedys. Everything that we have came from America. And they had this love that they adopted. My grandmother took us to Walden Pond. She took us to, on the Freedom Trail, she took us to the Civil War battlefields. My father, my Uncle Teddy, we went to all of the Revolutionary War battlefields, all the Civil War battlefields. And they revered the founders of our country, who were Protestant. And, when they came to Boston in 1848, when their great-grandparents, there was tremendous bigotry against Irish Catholics. In fact, my grandmother would show us clippings. Her father was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston, Honey Fitz, and she had clippings of him in the newspaper, pictures of him all over the house. One of them was him flying the first plane in Massachusetts, riding in the first biplane that ever had flown in Massachusetts. She would on the back side of the frame, she would turn it around, and there were classified ads, one after the other. And the classified ads always had a little acronym on them, NINA, N-I-N-A, meaning no Irish need apply. That was the Boston that they were raised in. And my grandfather ultimately had to leave Boston and come to New York because the bigotry against Irish Catholics was, so heavy there. But despite that, they felt part of this country. Even though the power structure didn't like them, they felt an affinity for the values and a love for the values of this country, even more than the people who hated them. And my father was raised in that household, and he raised us the same way, with a love for our country. And, part of that was the love for this extraordinary, experience that Israel had. Israel, which was, which was this little nation where the people had been scattered in the diaspora, scattered all over the planet and beleaguered and butchered and murdered everywhere. And they were first, the Babylonians, the Byzantine Empire, the Romans threw them out, stripped the land from them, and they were constantly trying to get back to that land. And finally, after World War II, after suffering the loss of 6 million people, cooked in ovens, gassed to death, women and children in the most horrendous industrialization of murder in the history of mankind. That out of that terrible tragedy, this flower sprouted in the desert, and the Israeli state. And by the way, after World War II, President Truman put huge amounts of resources into preserving democracy in Greece, and also keeping communist control out of Turkey, because he saw that as a bulwark against the enemies of the United States, who the Soviet Union at that time that was moving across Europe. He thought we had to keep those nations alive. Well, today we give aid to Israel. We give, $3.5 billion. And people should understand that aid that we give to Israel was part of the deal from Camp David and the subsequent deals that we said the U.S. participation in those deals is we will give you that money in exchange for you giving up the land and signing on to this agreement and creating peace in the Mideast. And we share intelligence and our military alliance with them. But there are so many of U.S. adversaries, including Russia and China, that are moving into that area right now. And the one most reliable ally that we have there, the outpost of the only democracy in the Mideast, is in Israel. And it's an important alliance. Meanwhile, we give $2.3 billion a year to Egypt, which tortures people, which is not a democracy. We give $1 billion to Jordan, which is not a democracy, and which tortures people and has no, functioning judiciary in the sense that Israel does. And we give $800 million to the Palestinian Authority, which uses that money literally to train children from birth to hate Jews and to kill them. And so the money that we send to Israel is money well spent.
We're about to go to questions, and we're going to end at 10 o'clock, so it'll only give us 20 minutes, but we're going to do as many as we can. But I want to say one thing to you, Bobby, as we transition to the questions. I want to thank you, and I say this sincerely. The Talmud has a famous expression that says that words that emanate from the heart penetrate the heart. It also rhymes in Hebrew. Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichasim el halev. Words that emanate from the heart penetrate the heart, because so many people are cynical about politics and about politicians. And when you and I went to the Celebrate Israel parade and you were getting into your car, and given how your father died and your uncle, you have a lot of security, and my heart went out to you that you have to live like that at times. But I just saw your courage marching with us, marching with the Jewish people, and I put my arms on your shoulder and I said, do you believe in God? And you said to me, God is the center of my life. And then you said to me, and you said it with such conviction, and you said to me, Shmuley, I'm going to be a great champion for Israel. You know what, Bobby? You absolutely kept your word. You have restored my... And any American Jews who have slandered you this week, I'm asking them to do the right thing and to apologize, because this was extraordinary. Extraordinary. Okay, so we have a microphone. We're going to do 20 minutes of questions. I only ask two things. Number one, do not make a statement, ask a question. Number two, keep it brief. Let's go. No, wait. No. We can't. I should say number three. Go ahead, the woman in the red. Go ahead, please.
Gentlemen, thank you both for tonight. My name is Vivacha Max Victor. I'm a proud Iranian-American Jew. So many of my fellow countrymen and women back home in Iran are being tortured and brutalized on a daily basis. Why do you think the leaders of the free world are allowing the torture, brutality, and executions to continue? And what will you do to help the Iranian people? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that very, very moving description. And that is exactly why we should not be sending money. I mean, we just sent $2.5 billion, or we're just committed to send $2.5 billion to Iran. We shouldn't do that until that. We should be boycotting them until those kind of crimes stop. And that's what I'll do as president.
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing. My father was born in Iran, in the city of Esfahan, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is the ancient imperial capital of Iran. I am Iranian American. To see the tragedy of this country from which I stem, and a community of Jews that is the oldest on earth, older than Israel. My family has been in Iran for 2,500 years. They left before Khomeini. My father left when he married my mother, who was an American, in the 1960s. To see the full tragedy of Iran is something that should be heartbreaking. A few years ago, we hosted the Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Let's be honest, Iran was not perfect under the Shah of Iran. There was the Savak, a military police that also tortured people. But the worst estimates of political dissidents who were killed by the Shah and by the Savak is probably 3,000 to 3,500 people. That is, you can never compare tragedies. But the brutality of the mullahs is so overwhelmingly worse that it is shocking that we give them any money. It is shocking that there isn't a global cry against how the Iranian people are being brutalized. I'm not speaking now about the genocidal threats against Israel or a nuclear weapon, with the Iranian generals saying that Israel's a one-bomb state, that it's good that Israel was created because now the Jews are all congregated into one place and one bomb will create a second Holocaust. I'm talking about the Iranian people, that nobody gives a damn about Iranian women watching how they were shot. 1,000 of them over the past year shot at demonstrations is sickening. That nobody cares that Iranian women who are married to a man that wants to get rid of them can literally simply accuse his wife of adultery, and the judicial system in Iran is such that you are guilty until proven innocent. So you accuse your wife of adultery, she has to prove she did not commit adultery, which is an impossibility, and when she doesn't, you dig a pit and you put her into the pit, and this was shown in that extraordinary real documentary and book written by a French journalist, no friend to Israel, this particular journalist, called the stoning of what was it called? Soraya, yeah, of Soraya M. She is stoned to death by her male issue, by her children. This is happening today, not 1,000 years ago. And the world watches it, and we give these brutes money so they can slaughter the Iranian people. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Do you support legislation that would prohibit forcing people to take vaccines? And do you support legislation that would protect children against mutilation, aka gender reassignment?
I definitely don't think those things should be mandated, and I think gender reassignment I'm very, very distressed by, you know, it's a very, very distressing into, and we need to really understand what we're doing to our children. And certainly, nobody should be doing that without parental permission. And you know, I don't think it's a good idea for children. Now, I do want to say this: we all need to respect people who have different gender identities, and they should never be shamed. And they should be never be treated differently or in ways that make them feel badly about themselves. We need to respect each other. We need to love each other. But I'm very, very disturbed by what's happening with very young children getting these, some of these treatments that I don't think we understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. One, can I get an autograph? The second, and this is a very important one, you have proven to be a very formidable force against Biden and the establishment. You've gained a lot of popularity and probably will win a lot of delegates at the primaries, but delegates isn't enough. You also have to win superdelegates in order to win. My question to you is, since we know the Democratic primary process involves superdelegates, which is controlled by the party elites who dislike your campaign as an outsider, what is your plan on getting the superdelegates on your side? And if not, what is your plan on getting this nomination?
And they say the Hasidic Jews are not worldly. You see that? Look at that. It's unbelievable. I'm wondering if half the political black belts in this room know what he's talking about, but that's good. Okay, it's an excellent question.
Yeah, I'm up against a very, very formidable force in the Democratic Party. But I also think that I have a lot of paths to victory. And I think I'm going to do, there's, a number of the first primaries I think I'm going to do very well. And I think more and more Democrats are going to support me. Our polling shows me beating both Trump and DeSantis easily. Trump by 8 points, DeSantis by 11. And meanwhile, Biden loses to Trump on poll after poll by 7 points. And I think most Democrats are going to want a Democrat in office. And I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. I think all of us wonder what's going to happen between now and the first primary. What's going to, there are so many things that could change. And I would only say that, when Moses started out for the Red Sea, he didn't know how he was going to get across it. And I can't tell you exactly how.
Thank you. Well, like Teddy Kennedy, he had a big stick, so he got across. Go ahead. No.
Autograph?
Yeah, but right after, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, thanks for speaking up for denuclearization and peace in the Middle East. I think that we share that goal. So my question is, would you support the demand that Israel let the International Atomic Energy Agency inspect their undeclared arsenal of nuclear weapons and demand that they sign on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Would I do that with Israel?
Yeah, we don't want to hold them to a different standard.
Yeah, no, I would not.
So Israel's allowed to have nuclear weapons, but nobody else in the region is?
Yeah, well, my position is I don't think that we should start an arms race in the Mideast. Israel has Israel's use of a nuclear weapon is not going to happen unless it's attacked, and we know that. Israel will never use a nuclear weapon unless it's attacked. And it's said that even at that point, it's going to be too late. So, what I'm worried about is an out-of-control arms race. Iran is now trying to build a nuclear weapon, and Saudi Arabia has now said, well, if Iran builds a nuclear weapon, we want a nuclear weapon, and they're already trying to build theirs. And all of those nations have the money to invest in that program, and if enough of them get nuclear weapons, these are totalitarian regimes, they're not democracies, and somebody ultimately is going to use it, and that's going to be the end of, humanity.
And let me just add, when you say that Israel should not be, that we should not have different standards, of course there's different standards, because Israel is a democracy. Israel is controlled by the people, and the people don't want to see a nuclear war. The problem with Israel's neighbors is that they are all autocracies, and none of them are democracies. And let me make a second point, because it becomes relevant. The biggest movie in the country right now, I haven't seen it yet because we just got back, but I can't wait to see it, is Oppenheimer. And is it the biggest, or is Barbie bigger? Have we? Okay, let's just shut the country down right now. Anyway, okay, Sound of Freedom. As long as it's not Barbie. Okay. A few blocks from here is a school and a center called the Society for Ethical Culture. Its most famous graduate is one J. Robert Oppenheimer. We've done tons of events there. I've even had the most controversial organizations on earth debate me there, like Jews for Jesus. No, not a lot of credibility in the Jewish community. Jews for Jesus, they had no issue with us having 1,000 people for me to debate the heads of Jews for Jesus. But they canceled on us yesterday, the Society for Ethical Culture, with no explanation, less than 24 hours before the event, breaking a binding contract. This is a nation of laws, a society with no ethics, destroying culture, while a movie about their most famous graduate is all about how a corrupt government agency tried to destroy their most famous graduate and censor him. Sound familiar? And they didn't even see the irony. And by the way, it is the intention of the World Values Network, God willing, to sue the Society for Ethical Culture. For the serious damages inflicted upon us in their cancellation. And now we're here in the Glasshouse. Thank God we found this venue. And to all of you who are the executives at Society for Ethical Culture, just remember, people in glass houses should not throw stones. Okay, next question, please.
As a fellow Cape Codder, I just want to, I think I'm uniquely qualified to express my admiration for your obvious integrity, intellectual integrity and moral integrity.
Thank you. Well, what part of the Cape are you from?
Hyannis.
Oh, great.
We're down the street from the compound. During the COVID era, it gave me so much hope and made me feel so great when you spoke out for the ability to question the medical, it was such an odd moment where there wasn't an ability to question the medical authorities.
But now I want you to question.
Yeah.
We have to have a question.
Okay, sorry. So on those lines, do you think big money is the reason for a lot of this getting rid of the First Amendment, not allowing us to question, which is such an American thing to do? Is it big money? Is that what's happening? The corporate money, the World Economic Forum? What's going on? It seems so puzzling to me that this is happening in D.C.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's big money and power and institutions, by their nature, want to acquire more and more power, and we saw that, and that's why it's really important. And now, we have this entire retinue of new technologies, these frightening new surveillance technologies like AI, which our children are going to, have to deal with GPS, with facial recognition systems, with these low-altitude, 415,000 low-altitude satellites that have now, been given permits, and devices that can listen to you all day. So your devices are listening to you, harvesting your information when you cough, when you sneeze, when you mention a new pair of boots or a mattress, and you get the ad. They're listening to you, and they are harvesting their data and selling it. But also, governments can do that as well. So we have this new kind of turnkey totalitarianism that is waiting there for the first tyrannical impulse to get up and take advantage of it. And that's why it's so important right now that we build up the barricades of our own Bill of Rights and our own democratic systems and protect those and fortify them, because the wave of intrusive, of weaponized technology for totalitarian states is coming at us, and we need to be strong.
The COVID-19 vaccines are beyond the particular discussion we're having tonight, but I should say, because I'm sure it'll come up, that the first time I met Bobby, I said to him, not only that I was quintuple vaxxed, as I said earlier, but I also told him that the World Values Network has a giant gala that we do every year at Carnegie Hall. And I want to acknowledge Gabe Bella's here, and where's Julie Bernstein, who helped, the main organizer of tonight. Thank you, Julie, wherever you are. God bless you. Came all the way from Miami to organize tonight. And Stephanie from the Kennedy team, Stephanie Spear, God bless you, Stephanie, and all the people who are Bobby's team. We're very devoted to him. But I told Bobby that we honored Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, for developing the vaccines. That's the first thing I said to him. And I said, way to make myself popular, like a good Jewish boy. Okay. And I said that Albert Bourla, as a child of survivors, his family was annihilated in Thessalonica in Greece, the only city on earth to have experienced 97% annihilation of their Jewish community. And his father survived. And I said that you had developed the vaccines and saved many lives. Bobby did not do what you just did. He didn't boo me. He may have disagreed with me, but you know what makes his campaign unique, and I'm calling on President Trump and President Biden and DeSantis and Nikki, everybody, to emulate his lead. You can actually disagree with Bobby and still have a strong intellectual bond and a strong and deep friendship. You don't have to choose every single side. That's a brain-dead America that none of us should endorse. A brain is not a liability. Okay, the next question, please. Well, you know what? There are most Orthodox Jews in America will probably agree with Bobby. I'll say they were very religious. They were anti-vaccine. I'm pro-vaccine. But you know what? Why can't we just talk without booing each other? I just don't get it. Go ahead, please.
Hi, yes. Hi, yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for your position on mandates. As a Jewish woman who cares for justice, I do have a question. It's been about a year since U.S. citizen and journalist Shireen Abu Ablaka was shot by the IDF. It is known through both video and forensic science that it was definitely the IDF and that they targeted her. Are you willing to commit to calling for Israel to extradite the soldier to the U.S. with body cam for a public U.S. trial? She is a U.S. citizen and justice should be served. Also,
no, wait.
Let me finish.
I will let you say your second part.
Don't speak over me,
No,
sir.
let's just do one question at a time.
Sir, please let me finish. Also, please,
if you make it quick.
Can you also commit to having a conversation one-on-one with Jewish Voice for Peace?
Okay, just one second, just a second. Come on. Wait. Let's be civil about this. What's your name, please?
My name is Janet Clark.
What is it?
Janet Clark Goodman.
Janet, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Israel is a open democracy with a free press.
I didn't ask you, by the way.
Excuse me. Well, you know what? Bobby will answer in a second. But I am going to correct misinformation. The IDF has now admitted that this renowned Palestinian journalist probably did die from an Israeli bullet during a shootout against terrorists. She was there covering it. What you said that she was deliberately targeted is an absolute lie. What is the source?
She was definitely targeted. She had a helmet on.
Wait.
She had a helmet on and she had armor.
She has covered.
There is no way.
She covered dozens of military.
There is no way.
Wait.
It took a direct shot.
No. She covered dozens of military. She covered dozens of military raids. Why did they wait to target her?
It took a direct shot.
They were what?
It took a direct shot to get her between the helmet and the armor.
What is your source for this?
What my source? My source is forensics and the video.
You have no source.
And the video.
So Israel conducted a lengthy investigation about this, which is what they do always. And amazingly, they admitted it probably was an Israeli bullet. And unfortunately, there are journalists who die in war zones. It is tragic.
This is a typical blood libel. Israel never targeted her. I am Jewish. Do not tell me that, Mr. Kennedy.
No truth to this.
please don't you believe that the U.S. should be able to adjudicate this? She was a U.S. citizen. She was also a journalist. And again, do you also commit to sitting down with the Jewish Voice for Peace and having a conversation with them, or do those Jewish voices not count? Yes, they do. Thank you.
Okay, enough. Let him respond, then we're going to move on. Go ahead.
I don't know enough about the case to make a judgment about, extradition, and I don't know if we even have an extradition treaty for that particular crime, or what the basis of it would be in Israel or Palestine or wherever the killing took place. I just couldn't answer your question.
Thank you. No, you
Israel
cannot
is
dominate the evening. The next question, please.
Do you agree?
Dominate the evening.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Kennedy. My question is on the topic of nuclear war, which you've addressed very well in your commencement address, which I think was one of the most important speeches given by a candidate. I'm personally an organizer for an organization called the International Peace Coalition. We've been organizing peace organizations across the world to really unite against this threat of nuclear war, And we really have to bridge the gap, as you said, because it no longer matters what our ideologies may be, what our particular beliefs are. Humanity is on the brink of annihilation, and we need to unite on that matter, no matter what.
But we need a question, please.
I'm getting to it, thank you. But I want, because Kennedy, you talked about his American University speech, I think is probably one of the most important speeches. We need a peace that's not for the grave, but a peace where all our families, everyone can cherish. And I want you to talk about that, and I really want you to endorse what we're doing with this peace coalition. And Helga Zepp-LaRue, she was the one who organized this.
We need a question, please.
She's calling for a durable security architecture among all the nations of the world. So I would like you to endorse that, and I'd like you to talk about the American University speech.
Well, first of all, I love what you said. Thank you for everything that you said.
Thank you.
And thank you for advocating for that, because it's so critical right now. I mean, we're in a potentially existential battle with Russia. I mean, the U.S. is now is effectively at war with Russia. It's a nuclear power, and they have 1,000 more nuclear weapons than we do. And nobody seems to be caring about this. So, I love what you said. My uncle, in that speech, which I agree was one of the most important speeches in American history, he had negotiated secretly a nuclear test ban treaty with Khrushchev. My uncle and Khrushchev had developed this extraordinary friendship with each other where they could talk to each other on a hotline. Their State Department, their intelligence apparatus all wanted to go to war, but both of them had been to war. And Khrushchev had been at Stalingrad. The last thing he wanted was to go to war, and he recognized that he was a partner with my uncle. They wrote each other 26 secret letters. The first one was smuggled we had a Soviet spy who used to visit our house when I was a little boy. His name is Georgy Bolshakov, and and we loved him. The kid, me and my 10 brothers and sisters, he would play with us. He would do Cossack dancing. He would climb ropes with my dad and do push-up contests. And he's a very charming guy. And it was cool for us because we knew he was a KGB spy and a GRU spy. And this was at a time when all the James Bond films were coming out, so it was cool having a spy in our house. Khrushchev knew he couldn't trust the people, his military apparatus, and my uncle knew that he couldn't trust his. They began corresponding with each other, hiding their letters in the New York Times, which Georgy Bolshakov would fly back and forth from Moscow and give them. And they devised a plan to create the first nuclear weapons treaty of the nuclear age, which was a nuclear test ban treaty. And when my uncle and they negotiated it secretly. They kept the State Department, the CIA out of it, and when they got the treaty, the U.S. sympathy for that treaty was 80-20 against it. And the military was in rebellion against my uncle. The Senate and House, even the Democrats were all against it. And that speech was the beginning of turning the tide. And what he said something extraordinary to the American people. Because we had all been raised with this idea that we had won the war. You know, it was America who beat Hitler. And, you know, we were watching shows like Vic Morrow and Combat on TV that showed Americans beating the Nazis and winning the war. And my uncle said, no, it was the Russians who won the war. The Russians, 1 out of every 7 Russians was killed. Hitler leveled a third of the country. He said, imagine if every city was reduced to rubble, every field burned, every forest burned between the East Coast and Chicago. That's what happened to Russia. And he said, we need to put ourselves into their shoes. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of our adversary. And it was the first time Americans had heard that, and they started thinking differently about it. And that 2 months later, that treaty passed. And, you know, I think it's important to think of today because nobody has talked to Putin for a year. We have no high-level relationship with Russia. We need to be talking to them. We need to do what my uncle said, which is to put ourselves in the shoes of our adversaries.
Very quick. I just want very quick.
Listen, we're well past 10. Wait, we're well past 10 o'clock, and Bobby did a. You know, the funny thing is that while Bobby's speaking here live, he's also speaking on Fox News as we speak, because he did a town hall with Hannity. You've had a long day. Can we go to 10:15? 10 more minutes, or are we going to cut it? Stephanie. Okay, you know what? Just to show a little bit of rabbinic generosity, we're going to do 2 questions if they're very short, and that's it. But that's it. It's only 2. I'm sorry, everybody. Go ahead. It has to be a question, though.
I'll make it very quick. Mr. Kennedy, thank you so much for being here. Earlier tonight, a heckler said that the Mossad was involved with the death of your father. Do you think in any way that the Mossad was involved in the death of your father?
I don't think so.
Good.
Thank you. Okay.
Hello, Mr. Kennedy. How you doing tonight? I just wanted to say thank you, like other people did, for your stances on the Ukraine war and on mask mandates and all your anti-establishment positions. But, sir, on the issue of Israel, you are in lockstep with both militaristic, duopoly, pro-war parties. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is, we know.
Let him speak. Let him speak.
Israel.
He has a right to speak, but it has to end with a question.
I love my Jewish people, but they are killing Palestinians every single day.
Let him speak.
In Israel.
Let him speak.
The Israeli government is killing Palestinians, sir. Why are you in lockstep with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in your unconditional support to Israel? Is it because you are afraid of them calling you anti-Semitic?
The answer to your question is no. That's not why.
All right, thank you.
Can I, listen, that was the last question, but if you don't mind, what is your name, please?
My name is Joel Perez.
Joel.
Yes.
Thank you for coming tonight. And your question was very legitimate. I don't agree with it, but of course it's legitimate. Thank you for asking it. May I just say one thing, if you don't mind?
Of course.
Let's imagine for a moment that everything you said is true. Let's imagine Israel's an apartheid state. I've heard worse. I debated in the Oxford Union last year. And by the way, I want to get Bobby to the Oxford Union because his father spoke there in 1967, January 1967. I was told by Israelis debating me that Israel's a Nazi state, Israel's a Gestapo state. I've heard worse. So let's say it's all true. Let's say the worst about Israel is true. It's an apartheid, Nazi, racist, imperialist, expansionist, occupation state. Do you also care about the fact, and the estimates are that between all the wars and everything, that something like 63,000 Palestinians have died, civilians, militants, soldiers, 60. Someone at the UN said 420,000 the other day. She was forced to apologize. Even she was forced to apologize. Does it also bother you that 600,000 Arabs have been murdered by Bashar al-Assad in Israel's neighboring state, including through sarin, poison, mustard gas? Have you spoken out against that as well?
I know that Palestinians are being
No,
killed
I'm
in
asking you a
Israel
question.
at a rate of
Does
10
it
to
only
1.
bother you if, let's say Israel's killing all these Palestinians purposely, they're shooting them.
My issue is with
I'm just
the US
asking you,
taxpayer
does it only
dollars
bother
going
you